Welcome to FS-ISAC's podcast, FinCyber Today. I'm Elizabeth Heathfield, Chief Communications Officer at FS-ISAC. We're filming here at FS-ISAC's EMEA Summit in Amsterdam, where one of the big topics, given impending regulation like DORA, is how do you measure risk? I spoke about it with Beate Zwijnenberg, Global CISO of ING and member of both our Global and Europe Board of Directors. Thank you so much for taking the time. So great to have you. So let's talk about a question that has been haunting security teams forever, which is how do you measure success? So I talked to a lot of CISOs, and there's a camp that believes that you can quantify risks, and then there's also some people who think, you really can't. Where do you sit?
Good question. I think we are also thinking about that ourselves. So yes, you want to quantify it more. You want to be a little bit more precise about, hey, what is the risk reduction? And we realize through, for instance, security improvement programs and stuff like that. But overall, it is still a challenge in ICT and IT risk management, definitely regarding the likelihood. Of course, if you look on a high level, we quantify ICT risks in general and cyber risks as well. Of course, because that is linked to the capital reservations you do overall as a company. So from that perspective, yes, of course, we quantify risk. But then if you're really looking into much more detail about, hey, can you quantify how much this improvement, potential investments are contributing to the risk reduction, then it becomes a difficult discussion, because then you are having conversations about what is the likelihood of different attack patterns or different attack threat actors hunting you. So and then it often comes to professional judgment. So from that perspective, if you really go in the nitty-gritty details, I would say we're rather at the camp of cannot instead of can. But I do think that when we are much more open about it and when it's more clear, so information sharing, incident reporting, of course, will help further improve quantification of risks as well. So from that perspective, can't and a bit can.
So, okay, let's start with where you can. How are you doing it? What are the scales that you're doing it? Like, can you put dollar amounts? How do you actually go about doing it?
If you look, I think looking back, you can put dollar amounts.
Yeah, that's the thing, right?
Yeah, and definitely if you look to certain events, you know what your operational losses are. You know what kind of effort you need to take to mitigate against it. And definitely from that perspective, looking back on the incidents and events level, definitely you can quantify and you put amounts into it. If you look into, and of course, investments in certain new tooling or technology landscape supporting security, often, of course, you need to provide a business case. And then you want to quantify also your reputational risk and those kind of elements, which are sometimes difficult to quantify. So yes, there's of course a business case with it, and you try to also bring, for instance, the operational effectiveness or efficiency into those business cases. But really, the risk reduction and how do you quantify that? That is the challenge. Yeah. So we're looking more from a cost perspective into those kind of investments. And understanding how you're compared to your peers or where you want to be, where you want to compare yourself with. So, for instance, on a maturity scale, so there we use more maturity indexes to understand, hey, how good are we in certain different capabilities like identifying risk, protecting against those, defending, detecting, response. So there we use more maturity scoring, or from another perspective, ratings like high, medium, and low to quantify it.
Is when you're talking to, and obviously CISOs, and cyber is becoming such a much more a board issue. When you're talking to boards, are you using those same kind of scales, or how are you at least? Maybe even giving relative scales as opposed to maybe absolute. How are you, using quantification to advocate for, budget and investment and things like that?
Yeah, I think you should, what I could tell, at least how we're doing it, we split a little bit more between the whole IT risk management practice, where of course cybersecurity is part of and information security is part of. And there we really report more to the risk committee, understanding what is the likelihood and impact more on a standard matrix, like what is the likelihood and what is the impact, trying to assess it on classifications like medium, high and low, and what is the reputational risk, what are the costs related to it. And of course, there we measure how good we are from a control implementation perspective. So we're really looking in that side more on the control implementation side and the effects of it. For instance, where we use data points like how many open vulnerabilities do you have, saying something about vulnerability management, and then the control regarding the whole risk management framework. So that is more the, call it the risk reporting line of cyber, which we are feed into. If you, on the other side, if I'm talking to our board, but also to our supervisory board, I also have defined strategic goals with my security organization about improving, for instance, our capabilities in the different areas like prevention, detection, response. And there I have a strategic change initiatives ongoing, like, for instance, rolling out new technology on our servers, as an example. So there are also, next to, of course, the risk reporting part, I also discuss progress and the scope and the coverage on those strategic programs, next to, of course, more in-depth assessments on, for instance, ransomware. What kind of capabilities do we have in place? How good are we protected? And then you go again a little bit better into, I would call it color coding or maturity. We're very good in it. We still have a capability that needs to be improved. So we keep it a little bit more on the capability side and how mature we are from that capability perspective.
How do you, I guess you set up expectations with the board that these are the kinds of things that you're going to be continuously reporting on, and you always sort of reporting on these same progress so that they know what to expect and they know what to ask. Makes a lot of sense. Let's talk a little bit about DORA in terms of, risk management. And we were speaking earlier about how, DORA does seem to be a kind of enterprise risk management framework. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you see it and how you see integrating DORA into your sort of larger risk management strategy?
Yeah, I think definitely you're right. If you see on DORA, they of course have pillars. And the first pillar, they are less, let's say, it's more high level on ICT risk management. They want you just to have an ICT risk management or IT risk management practice in place, where they, of course, expect you to select controls and to make sure that you have the right coverage of all those controls. And I think DORA really focuses on some of the key areas to highlight. And I think if you look to highlighting definitely on incident reporting, they're going to be more clear about incident reporting, understanding what's going out in the market, not only from a financial industry perspective, but also from critical suppliers to understand how many incidents do they have, what does that tell us about resilience overall as a, let's say, as a worldwide ecosystem from that perspective. And the other pillar is really focused on end-to-end testing, making sure that everybody is more testing really resilience, because I think having a control framework in place and proving that the control framework is in place, the most effective way of doing it is by testing. By really testing, like cyber test, really trying to hack and to understand, okay, can I go through it, yes or no? What should I change? Because we're all humans, people can make mistakes. So I think emphasis on the real testing in the real life situation is an important pillar of DORA. And I think the last pillar is indeed more focused on information sharing, where I think by doing so, you're trying to also increase the resilience. And then back to your question about how is that link into your IT risk management practice, I think it's just putting maybe a little bit more focus on specific areas or detailing out specific requirements that comes out of DORA and translating it into your own IT risk management framework. I didn't read anything had to say, oh, we never thought about it. It could be more that it's sometimes a little bit more prescriptive, like are they really going to prescribe how often you need to do vulnerability scanning? If that is the case, then of course you need to adjust one of your internal policies on vulnerability scanning as an example. But it's not that organizations...
We're never doing it right.
Exactly.
Of course.
So for me, it is not... Most of the things are not things that we are not doing. It's more emphasis on certain elements in certain areas. And of course, the big advantage is that it's not only applicable anymore to financial institutions. So I think the whole aim is also to make sure that the rest of the eco landscape and your supply chain move to a higher maturity level.
One of the things that you mentioned as well is that, the standardization of some of these IT risk management practices, I think, is also something that DORA could be quite an advantage, even if it may be, more specific or more prescriptive than maybe was in the past. It could actually also have a positive impact in the standardization, and certainly with suppliers, because of course the financial sector is using a lot of the same suppliers, and right now there is no standardization across the due diligence process, et cetera. So what do you want to just talk a little bit more about that, and why you see that as a benefit?
Yes, I think what is definitely the benefit, if we are more in the same way acting towards our third parties, then you can also use facilities that do certain assessments on behalf of you. But as long as we are all having our own, call it IT risk management standards or frameworks and requirements set. Often you set your requirements in contractual clauses, and if everybody has a slightly different flavor, then it's become much more difficult to, one, automate, and two, to use a centralized facility. Because I truly believe that it's an end-to-end, let's say, connection. And if you put something in the middle, that will create efficiency and effectiveness for everybody. So really, if we are moving more to standard contractual clauses for third parties, for instance, then we can all rely on the same SOC Type 2 statements or assessments done, or even audits done on third parties that we can use instead of we all individually knock on their doors. It's a burden on two sides. So really standardization in, call it contractual clauses, is for me the only way forward in creating a more efficient way to deal with our third parties.
I want to talk a little bit about the Europe board, because you've been on our global board for a while, but now with the Europe board, you serve on both. And so I'd love to just talk about why you think it's important to have a Europe board, what the value already has been, even though it's quite new, and what your hopes are for it as we move forward.
Thanks. More than happy to do so. I really enjoyed being on the global board, definitely. But what I noticed on the European board, we're having more discussions in the context of Europe. And often in the past, the conversations on the global board are sometimes American focused, because of course it's a huge country with a lot of different flavors as well, and a lot of different challenges. And some of the challenges are comparable. We were discussing earlier about software supply chain. We all have the same challenge there. But the angle of how our regulators act compared to American regulators are sometimes just simply different. So having a European board where you can connect easily with also European peers is very much essential moving forward, I believe.
And what's been your experience here at the Europe Summit, the EMEA Summit, in terms of the feedback that you've gotten? We had a panel with the board, and we had our European CISO Congress. What's been the feedback that you've gotten from members?
I received quite positive feedback. I was catching a cup of coffee and then talking to some people, and they say, really, we see the difference already of having a European board. It feels more like a European then also organization, not only purely focused in the American context. So I think from that perspective, people are really happy that we have a European board and that it's getting a kind of entity feeling around it. So from that perspective, quite positive. Also, what I got as feedback is that sharing intelligence, having the conversations with peers is really, really valuable. And if I reflect to myself, to be honest, the CISO summit, let's say in the Congress, was really wonderful. It's a good way of getting insights from other CISOs at big European banks or financial institutions to understand where they are on the path, for instance, like DORA, on topics like DORA, but also in general to catch up and to say, hey, how are you dealing with this topic, and what does that mean for you? That is really added value, I would say.
Yeah.
So quite positive.
Great. So if somebody wanted to be a global CISO of ING, or just a CISO in general, what is the maybe less obvious, there's some obvious advice, but then what is something that maybe some people won't think of in terms of the skills that they need to really succeed in the job?
Yeah, I think one of the skills you really need to succeed in the job is to be really good in, call it stakeholder management across the whole organization, because definitely the topic for information security, maybe years ago it was only more in the IT side of the organization, but given the fact that cyber risks or ransomware in general, topics like that are so disruptive that it's becoming a much more broader organizational topic. So you need to be capable of explaining that to the business side of the organization, to the chief risk officer, to the chief financial officer, because they really need to understand it, and you need to connect to different types of people and different types of organizational functions. You have strong relations with privacy persons and legal in your organization. So the capability of connecting and finding the right moments on their change or on their journey to say, hey, if you're going on that way, hey, let's team up, because this is a perfect moment to streamline our line of thinking, for instance. So it's not only SEC on the technical side, but it's also how do you connect with the other parties in the organization, cross-functional.
If somebody came from a technical background, as many security leaders do, how would you advise them to get the experience on the business side to be able to speak the language of the business lines?
Have a lot of conversation, join sometimes their meetings to understand how they look to certain areas, where they come from, where they start with their thinking, because they start from the other side around. IT is after for them. It starts with the customer, with the business, with sales or whatever, and you really need to understand that their starting point of thinking of a problem or an issue is a different one.